Hi everyone, I'm Associate Professor Stephanie Russo and I'm the Discipline Chair of Literature here at Macquarie University, and I'm joined today by one of our best students in the English major, Annie Patterson, who is studying a joint major in English and paleobiology. So welcome Annie, and thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here, thank you.
So Annie, can you tell me why you decided to do an English major?
I became an English major because it made sense for me to do so. I have had a passion for reading since before I can remember. And when I was moving through primary school and through high school, I was always really engaged with what I was learning about the books that I was reading, and then later on the poetry that I was reading and the plays that I was reading and then the films that I was watching. And when I was heading towards my graduation in high school, I realized that there was a very real chance that I wouldn't get the opportunity to further my study. And that was the point at which I made the decision that I didn't want to leave English in high school. I wanted to continue to study it at university. And I had by that point already made up my mind that I was going to study science at a tertiary level, but I realized that for my own satisfaction, but also for my own well-being, because I knew where my passions lay, that it made sense for me to double my science major with my English major and to continue my English journey at a university level.
So what would you say are some of the differences between studying English at high school and English at university?
I would say that there are significant differences between the way you study English at a high school level and at a university level. And I think when I advocate for the benefits of studying English at university, the first thing that I bring up is that at university, it really is very, not necessarily self-guided, except, well, not until the later years, certainly, but you do get the opportunity and the scope to investigate what you want to investigate about a text, to examine the elements that interest you, and to draw out the arguments that are pertinent to your research interests. In high school, you are told the correct way to read a text, and you're given a very formulaic rubric that you're expected to adhere to give the right answer. And I think that, especially coming from someone who's studying science as well as English, what you do tend to contrast is that science is very black and white and English is full of gray areas. And the high school mode of studying English has fewer gray areas, which isn't necessarily incorrect. It's just not as interesting as it can be at university, where the gray areas hold a lot of excitement and a lot of potential. And it's in those gray areas that you discover where your passion and your interest lies. Because the most obvious way of reading a text, or the most overt thesis that an author is presenting, isn't necessarily going to be the most interesting way for you to engage with that material. So I think the main difference is at university, you have the opportunity and you have the scope to not only indulge your passions for literature, but to discover them as well, because there's excitement and possibility in the gray areas that you're somewhat denied with a high school approach to literature, sticking to a rubric and having prescribed correct answers.
Okay, Annie, thanks for that. Can you tell me about what you think some of the advantages of doing an English major are?
I think that as an English major studying English literature, the word literature is significant in the sense that it teaches you literacy. It teaches you how to understand why certain things make you feel or make you think or make you question the way that they do. And I remember going through high school, the first thing that really caught my attention as being, wow, this is really applicable, this is really useful, was when I learned visual literacy and studying that in terms of visual pieces of media like films or even just images. But moving into university, I think it moves beyond, oh, I can understand why an advertisement or why a billboard is making me feel this way or making me interrogate this information in this way through the use of color or vectors or symbolism. At university, when you really delve into the written word in a deeper and a richer way, you develop a vocabulary for understanding why you make certain readings of certain texts. And an example I'll draw on is when you watch a film and you critique the representation of women, or you read a book, or you watch an episode of a television series, and you feel as though it's making a profound statement about womanhood or about femininity, but you're not sure why you feel that way. At university, well, one of the classes that I did recently was about critical approaches to literature, and learning about feminist theory and gender theory gives you a vocabulary to understand why certain pieces of media and why certain texts affect you in some way, more so than just being able to glance at it and to understand the surface level techniques. It's thematic interest and philosophy that you touch on when you study English at university. It's not just, oh, here's how to write an essay and here's how to analyze a text, but like I said, the vocabulary that you develop studying English and studying literature critically, you can then extrapolate on and take into other areas of your life. And I think it makes it more enjoyable to engage with pieces of media and to engage with texts when you have that vocabulary developed from a study of English. It not only can you enjoy them purely because they're enjoyable, but you can understand why they hold the value that they hold and perhaps even why they are enjoyable.
So you're studying a double major with English and science, paleobiology. How would you say that being an English major has helped you to be a better science student?
It's interesting that you should ask that, actually, because when I tell people about what I'm studying at university and I go, yeah, I'm doing a Bachelor of Arts and I'm majoring in English literature, but I'm also doing a Bachelor of Science and I'm majoring in paleobiology, the first comment that I always get is, wow, those are pretty different. And it's correct. It's on face value, it's quite difficult to find an overlap between a scientific discipline that's dealing in prehistoric life and a discipline about literature and literacy in visual and written modes. They don't really seem to have many points of junction. However, having studied them, I have felt that there have been some skills that have transferred from one major to the other, and that is both directions, but I have to say that I have found the most benefit in the transference of skills from my English major to my science major. And those skills are twofold. Firstly, what you learn in an English major, studying literature, is how to develop an opinion. You learn how to be critical, you learn how to formulate a thesis, because texts in themselves are quite complex and they very rarely have a simple or obvious reading that you can make. Especially the more you study them, the more you realize that there's alternative pathways that you can follow that are just as legitimate and just as fruitful as perhaps the most obvious or overt reading. So an English major teaches you to mine for an argument, to mine for an opinion, to develop a thesis. And that's very applicable in science, because in order to formulate hypotheses and to develop investigations and also just to perform research, you need to have a thesis, you need to have an argument, you need to be able to articulate an opinion from evidence. And an approach based on an English study teaches you how to formulate an opinion based on evidence, especially grey area evidence, like I mentioned before, which is also apparent in science. It's not exclusively black and white. The other reason why I believe that studying English has made me a better science student is that what you learn in English is not just to formulate an argument or a thesis, but is how to sustain that argument in written form. And even though there are distinctions between, say, your stock standard English essay and your stock standard scientific report, you do not only write science reports in science. There are also such things as science essays. And I have a very, what I call it fond, perhaps I would call it fond, memory of studying an ecology unit earlier in my degree, where we did have an assignment that was a science essay, which didn't have the prescriptive structure of a scientific report. And it came to light in that assignment that a lot of the students in the class had never been taught how to sustain an argument without a prescriptive sectional structure that a scientific report had. So not only, to recap, not only has my study of English literature taught me how to formulate ideas, but it has taught me how to extensively write about those ideas in a way that develops the thesis, but also draws critically on the evidence that I'm dealing with. And that, I believe, is an essential interdisciplinary skill, how to be critical and then how to articulate what you have understood from your critique of something.
Thanks so much, Annie, for joining me today to talk about the English major.
It has been wonderful to be here. Thank you.